thank you for the group of people tonight that have found time to come out and look at your word. And we're really enjoying Deuteronomy, and I'd ask that you just help us to get what you have for us. Help us to understand the importance of it. Help us to grow closer to you. It shows your heart, Father God, and help us to just understand your heart a little more. I just thank you for the privilege of exploring your Torah together. In Yeshua's name, amen. So last week we were in chapter 4. Old Lisa got kind of emotional about part of the stuff there because it's very nice. You know, if Deuteronomy doesn't do another thing, it shows the heart of Moses, and Moses is speaking for God, so it shows the heart of God. So let's see, we left off in, you realize that all the Israelites are encamped on the plains of Moab, which is probably 500 feet above sea level, looks out over the Dead Sea and the Jordan River Valley across. You can see Jericho over there, and you can see the hills, and someday that will have Jerusalem. I forgot my little laser pointer. Let me get my laser pointer. This is okay. We have time for me to do this. That black thing. Okay. It works. Blinded myself. It works. So they're right here, this big flat spot. Jericho is across the river over here. One of these days, Jerusalem will be here. Right now, the Jebusites are over there. And they've just gotten through, Moses has been telling them, they've just gotten through conquering, if you will, Sihon, the king of Bashan, and Og, the king of Heshbon. I think I've got those right. The Amorites. And you remember that Gad and Reuben said, we'll just take our territorial inheritance here. And half of the tribe of Manasseh says, that sounds like a good idea. We think we'd like ours there too. So we've had that little discussion. And Moses is just talking along. He knows that this is his last hurrah. He's going to die before the Israelites cross the Jordan River and start taking over the land that God has promised to them. So I'll read, if that's okay, starting in verse 32 of chapter 4. We read this last week, but it was just such a fun thing to read. Hi, Esther. So starting in verse 32 of chapter 4, this is Moses talking to the Israelites, and he says, ask now about the former days, long before your time, from the day God created man on the earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything so great as this ever happened, or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire, as you have, and lived? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation, by testings, by miraculous signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds like the things that Yahweh your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? You were shown these things so that you might know that Yahweh is God. Besides him there is no other. From heaven he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words from out of the fire. Because he loved your forefathers and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength, to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into their land, to give it to you for your inheritance as it is today. Acknowledge and take heart this day that Yahweh is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. Keep his decrees and commands, which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long in the land Yahweh your God gives you for all time. Amen. Right? How can you not? That's an emotional speech. Lisa.
Is this it? Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say, it says also, Ha Elohim. He's the God.
The
Each
God.
time he says he's the God, because he's just not any God.
Yeah.
I mean, it is amazing if you think about it.
Well, one of the things that I've enjoyed thinking about is the fact that, we certainly, if you've come up through Christianity, you're used to thinking about God as God. We've been taught monotheism since we began. But back in these times, it was a polytheistic world. Different people groups had different gods, and there were lots of gods around. The Greeks had a bunch. They all had a bunch of gods. And he is willingly placing himself in their game, if you will. But he points out that there is none but him. He created all of them. He's the creator God of the universe who created everything out of nothing, and none of them did that. Yeah, well, that gets better. Yeah, we're going to talk some more about that tonight, where he talks about how amazing it is that he picked the Israelites. Anyway, I just wanted to do that because that's a good way to start. Gets us in the right frame of mind. So we're now on verse 41. It's a little short passage there. Would someone like to read from verse 41 through 43, and we'll talk about it for a minute? Okay.
Then Moses served 3 cities on this side of Jordan toward the sun rising. Then the slayer might flee thither, which should kill his neighbor unawares, and hated him not in times past, and that fleeing into one of these cities he might live, namely Bezer, in the wilderness, in the plain country of the Reubenites, and the Ramoth of the Gilead, and of the Gadites, and the Golan in the Bashan, and the Manasserites.
Okay, that's a short passage, but we read every little thing, so we might as well read that too. The cities of refuge. We've talked about cities of refuge back in Numbers. It says, my version had it a little bit different. To anyone who had killed a person could flee if he had unintentionally killed his neighbor without malice aforethought. Yeah. In other words, there's no city of refuge for someone who murders. And murder is something that has been done with pre-planning. It's not you can't charge it was an accident. It was something that you planned to do and you went out and you killed someone. That's murder. That's not for the city of refuge. City of refuge of what our legal system today would call manslaughter. John?
At the risk of being a little political,
That's okay.
people want to advocate cities of refuge today, right?
Yeah.
Are they the same people that are very Torah observant and even Bible observant?
Not typically, in my opinion.
It just seems kind of odd to me. They seem to be appealing to the rest of the people for something that they don't believe in, fundamentally. Yeah. And they're not, as you said, that these cities aren't set up for illegal aliens. They're set up for people who have done manslaughter.
Yeah. So actually, they call them sanctuary cities, but the concept's, similar. So anyway, he mentions the cities, the 3 cities that were on the east side of the Jordan River. And he mentions one of them, Bezer, in the desert plateau for the Reubenites. So the Reubenites are in here, and I can't read that well enough, but there's probably one of those cities that's named Bezer. There it is. That could be it right there. They're reasonably, good-sized cities. They're not little bitty hamlets. So there's that one. There's Ramoth and Gilead. Now Gilead is up in here, where Gad has his territory, and again, my eyes aren't good enough to find Ramoth up there, but I wouldn't doubt that it would be up in here. And then it said the 3rd city is Golan in Bashan. The Golan Heights is off the map here. The Golan Heights is north and east of the Sea of Galilee, which is right here. And so I'm pretty sure that Golan would be somewhere where the Golan Heights is today. So anyway, all three of these cities are more or less identifiable today. Who knows how many cities of refuge there were in the whole nation of Israel? 6. There were 3 on the east side of the Jordan and 3 on the west side of the Jordan. The 3 on the west side of the Jordan we will learn about in the book of Joshua, because the book of Joshua talks about how, it takes over after this book. It's the next book, and it talks about what happens as the Israelites cross the Jordan River and their taking of the land that God promised. Beg your pardon? Oh, I don't know how many times that you go through this, and we get through the book of Deuteronomy, and everyone says, let's not go back to Genesis, let's just read Joshua. We did that once. Ralphie and I did a series, on his in-depth thing, and we went through the book of Joshua in great detail. It's a great book. There's no two ways about it. It's a lot of fun. You can find 3/4 of the cities that are named in there. You can find them. Then there's good stories, and by the time it's all over, the different tribes have their inheritance. There's a little bit of confusion. One of the things that I appreciated about the time that we went through it with Ralphie was the Danites, because early on, the Danites, the tribe of Dan, got some land over on the Mediterranean coast, right around over in here. And you have to read Joshua pretty carefully. But when you read it pretty carefully, you find out that they weren't able to hold on to it. And since they didn't hold on to it, they basically moved way up to the north of the Sea of Galilee. And so their land holding changed. They were in the far north. Anyway, that's interesting stuff. But we'll talk about that. We'll see when we're through the book of Deuteronomy. Well, yeah, that's what happened. They couldn't hold on to it, which was symptomatic of the problem, and we're going to read about this tonight, that they didn't take it all. God tells them very clearly, we'll read just in a little bit, kill everybody that you run into and take it all. Don't leave anybody, because if you leave anybody, they'll be your downfall. Yep. Isn't that the truth? Yep. Okay, let's go on. Verse 44 through the end of chapter 4. That's real short too. Someone want to read verse 44 to the end of the chapter? Okay. Charlie will give you the microphone because he's Johnny on the spot. Charlie on the spot.
This is the teaching that Moses placed before the children of Israel. These are the testimonies, the decrees, and the ordinances that Moses spoke to the children of Israel when they left Egypt, on the bank of the Jordan, in the valley opposite Bet Peor, in the day of Sihon, the king of the Amorite, who dwells in Heshbon, with whom Moses and the children of Israel smote when they went out of Mitzrayim. They possessed the land and the land of Og, and the land of Og, the king of Bashan, and the land of Og, the king of Bashan, 2 kings of the Amorite. These are on the bank of the Jordan, where the sun rises, and from Aroer, that is by the shore of Arnon Brook, that Mount Sihon, which is Hermon, and the entire Arabah, the east bank of the Jordan, until the sea of Arabah, until the waterfalls of the cliffs. Is that it?
That's good enough.
Okay.
This is an introduction to the next chapter. And basically, he's doing 2 things. He's saying in verse 44, this is the Torah Moses set before the Israelites. In other words, I'm going to tell you what the law is. And he gave these words. He talked about these things while they were camped. This is, we've said before, over here, across from the Jordan River. What else did he say? He says, in the land of Bashan and Sihon, right in here. And after they had taken over, in other words, he's locating exactly the place that he's going to do this, or that he did this, both in terms of time and in terms of location. And it's pretty cool that you can still find that, you know. And the Arabah east of the Jordan. Here's the river Arnon, so it was north of the Arnon River Gorge. The Arnon River Gorge actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Salt River Gorge, because you know how as you're going to Shiloh, and you're driving across this kind of plain, and then you have to start going down these curvy, windy, switchback type roads, and you get to the very bottom, and you cross this river, and then you wind up clear, you know, you go all the way back up on top so that you're essentially at the same level you were when you started. That gorge is the same way. And it even, if you saw it, maybe someday you will, it'll remind you of that. Okay. So now we're in chapter 5. Hello. Let's see here. So there's a little preamble. I think, you know, I want to do this. There's some fun things to think about here. So first of all, let's read from verse 1 through verse 5, the first 5 verses of chapter 5. It's a short little thing, but would somebody like to read that?
And Moses called to Israel and said unto them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your ears this day, that ye may learn them and keep them and do them. Yahuwah our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Yahuwah made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us, who we are all here alive this day. The Yahuwah talked to you face to face in the mount of the midst of the fire. I stood between Yahuwah and you at the time, and show you the word of the Lord, which you were afraid by reason of fire, and went not up unto the mount, saying, do you want me to keep going?
Nope. And he said, I want to talk just for a couple of minutes about that. So he basically gets all of Israel together, and he says, hear these laws and decrees. Okay? And he said, where did he say you heard them first? You haven't, you know, this is different. This is not the first time you heard them. Yeah, at Horeb, which is Mount Sinai. And he says, it was not with our fathers that Yahuwah made this covenant, but it was with us, with all of us who are alive here today. Well, yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. Because for a lot of them, it wasn't them, right? A whole bunch of people, that generation died. The generation that first got these and heard God, listened to the report of the 10 spies and decided not to obey God, and his punishment was, well, you'll die in the desert. So they wandered in the desert for 40 years. So what do you suppose this means, John? Sorry. Me and you. That's good. That's good. That's exactly what I was going to say. Let's see what John says.
What was that again?
She said, me and you.
Me, Moses, and you?
No,
Or
no.
God? Me,
us.
God.
Yeah.
Y'all.
All y'all.
Y'all.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking now, the ones that weren't punished, were they old enough to enter into a covenant?
Well, they would be.
I mean, they may have been alive and they may have been a witness.
Yeah. The way it would have worked, I think, this is just me, was you were liable for service in the military when you were 20 or older. Okay? And there were a bunch of these guys standing there this day that were 20 or were under 20 at the time of the rebellion, if you will. And so they're still there. So the ones that were 20 and older primarily had died.
So then who is our fathers? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the ones that died in the desert?
I think it's both. I think it's both.
So I guess the point is, is this like a second command, a second covenant? It doesn't have all the accoutrements and all the fanfare of what happened at Mount Sinai 40 years earlier.
Well, I tell you what I think it is. I don't think it's a second one. I think it's a second telling of the first one. It's like a renewal of the vows. Okay?
Well, it's like us in the Hebrew roots movement. We say a renewed covenant. It's still the same covenant that was 3,500 years ago, but it's new to us.
Exactly.
And this is new to them.
Yep.
And they didn't have the sin of
Unbelief that the
well,
previous-
like the golden calf
Yeah.
incident.
But more than that, I think it's also got to do with the fact that he's making it real clear that you don't get to ride in on your parents' coattails. This is the decision you have to make. You have to enter into this covenant. You and every generation from now on. Okay? That makes sense to me.
Well, and I was thinking that for Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, they didn't, in a sense, it's a fulfillment of what was prophesied, but they didn't get to see the covenant. They didn't get to see that covenant being written down and being, and so he's saying, not with your forefathers, but, with our forefathers, they didn't get to see this. We were the ones that experienced it. We were the ones that heard his voice and saw his, face to face. And so, that's how I read it anyway.
Okay.
I didn't read it like, not that it isn't about us too, because we are alive today. But I also read it that Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, they weren't there.
I understand. Yeah. On the other hand, you've got to admit that the whole idea of this covenant with God is a little
Intertwined.
well, no, it's God, because he was alive at the beginning and is alive now and is the same. He's kept his promise, but he expects the other half of the covenant to keep his promise too. And his promise goes from generation to generation to generation, a concept that God doesn't have to deal with. So,
Right, he said he made it with us. He made it with we have to be involved.
we do. But what he said to Abraham was, I make this covenant with you and your descendants who follow you.
Right.
So God knows that he's making it with descendants
With
that Abraham didn't
everybody.
even know he was going to have, obviously. Charlie?
So you don't have a concept of in perpetuity until you have a second one, right?
Okay? That's a good point.
Right? You can't have a link unless you've got two links, at least two links to link together.
Yep.
And this is the thing that's unique about this time is this is the next generation. And so therefore the covenant is in perpetuity. Israel, if you look at them as all the generations going through time, are not therefore bound by time.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Like Yahweh is not bound by time. So as if each generation does the right thing and receives the baton and does hold on to the baton, if you could use that for an analogy, and passes it on to the next generation, and that keeps going, then it's in perpetuity.
Yeah. Yeah. And if they will obey the terms of the covenant, each generation, then it's perfect. Of course, we know they didn't, but that's beside the point. That's the intention. Yeah. Esther. That's fair. 2 witnesses, and this is the second witness. That's a good catch. What do you think about this verse 5? Mine's in parentheses, so you always kind of have to ask yourself, why is that there? At that time, this is Moses talking, at that time I stood between Yahweh and you to declare to you the word of Yahweh, because you were afraid of the fire and did not go up to the mountain. Do you remember that? Remember that? Say, I have that written down here somewhere. Yeah. Do you remember the story? Okay, he's going to describe it again in a minute, but let's go back and look at it now just for the fun of it. It's Exodus chapter 20. Beg your pardon? Exodus chapter 20. Verses 18 through 21. I'll read it. Exodus chapter 20 is where the Ten Commandments are listed. 10 words. At the culmination of the 10th word, verse 18 is when it starts. It says, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. That's how dramatic, man. That's right out of Cecil B. DeMille. John.
So now, with the children, this didn't happen.
No.
So that's the parentheses is sort of like, well, okay, this is what happened back then.
Yeah.
You, as in you, your fathers primarily,
Yeah.
said, you, Moses, you go up there. Well, Moses ain't going in. He's done here. His work here is done. And so he's not going with them, so they can't say anymore, oh, Moses, you go before God.
Well, that's a good point.
These people have to do that.
Yeah. Good point.
There's no Moses rubber crutch to hold on to.
Yeah. So it's what I gathered from one of the implications an implication of what you've said is this is a restatement of the covenant that they might not be fully aware of, right? This is to make sure that they know what the covenant is. That's why he's doing this. Let me remind you of the the covenant that you entered into, your fathers entered into, and therefore you are part of.
It's almost like it's really a respectful thing because he's saying you don't need me. You know it's almost I look at it as a compliment because these guys have a different mindset than the fathers the fathers that they couldn't get rid of the stink of being in slavery of Egypt, and they don't have that on them.
Yep, that's a very good point. Yeah, the people 40 years earlier were born slaves. Most of these people were not. They might not quite know what they are, but they certainly weren't born as slaves. Not all of them, but most of them. So then we go into this is now the reason why Deuteronomy is called Deuteronomy, because it's the second telling, or the second law. It's the same, as we'll read, as the first one, but it's the second telling. And Moses is telling it to a largely different group of people. Margaret. Oh, no doubt. As a matter of fact, these guys, they've been running around for 40 years following a pillar of smoke in the day and a fire by night. And, there's no doubt that they know. It's not like they've never heard this. That's true. But I'm sure this is a somewhat solemn occasion anyway. Goes back, yeah. Would you like to read them? If I gave you a microphone. Okay. If Charlie gave you a microphone. Beg your pardon? Yeah. So read from verse 6 through verse 21.
I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. You have no other mighty ones against my face. You do not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of which is in the heavens above, or which is in the earth beneath, or which is in the waters under the earth. You do not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, Yahweh your Elohim, am a jealous El, visiting crookedness of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing kindness to thousands, to those who love me and guard my commandments. You do not bring the name of Yahweh your Elohim to naught, for Yahweh does not leave unpunished who brings his name to naught. Guard the Sabbath day, to set it apart, as Yahweh your Elohim commanded you. 6 days you labor, and shall do you all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, so that your male servant and your female servant rest as you do. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Mitzrayim, and that Yahweh your Elohim brought you out from there by a strong hand and by an outstretched arm. I kind of lost the thing here.
Love those phones.
Therefore, Yahweh your Elohim commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. 16. Respect your father and your mother as Yahweh your Elohim has commanded you, so that your days are prolonged and so that it is well with you on the soil which Yahweh your Elohim has given you. You do not murder. You do not commit adultery. You do not steal. You do not bear false witness against your neighbor. You do not covet your neighbor's wife, nor do you desire your neighbor's house, his field, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, his ox, nor his donkey, or whatever belongs to your neighbor.
Okay. So these are the famous Ten Commandments, right? So I'd like to look at these for a few minutes. I mean, it's always useful to think about them. First of all, I've heard a couple of different renditions in terms of the way you count them. To me, the first commandment is really, and yours said you do not. The shall not makes a little more sense to me, because do not would imply that you will not. Well, I guess it's the same thing. Anyway, the first commandment for me, I think, is you shall not have other gods before me. Now, a lot of people seem to think it's I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. But that's not a commandment, if you ask me. A commandment is telling you something to do. That first sentence is telling you who's saying this, right? But the first commandment is you shall have no other gods before me. Yeah, I certainly have. Yes. Yes, it matters a lot. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we'll do that when we're done.
Okay. This first commandment say, don't have other gods, only me.
Mm-hmm.
We make gods at home. When we give you preference on child,
When we do what?
on children, I have a 4. And I say, this is the best, this is the wonderful, this is this. We make a God with that. We got an idolatry with some things at home, like, what is your God? I have my God before. It's work for money. After I got the accident, and I come back, he pulled me, and I come back with pain, with a lot of problems in my body. He made me, he remind me, he's only my God, and he provide everything for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I need to believe it, and he provide for me.
Mm-hmm.
When we feel envious for things another have, but everybody in my own thing is working for his desire.
Mm-hmm.
It's because you fasting, it's because you praying, it's because you helping, it's because you did. It's a miracle when you see all the things coming to you without working.
Mm-hmm.
We need to work, but we're in his work, sharing with the other, says to the other, But people work for money.
Well, I understand what you're saying. There's a, you have to be careful to assess what is a God in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, because it can be working for things. And those things, those material possessions are, in essence, a God in your life because you're putting all your thoughts and efforts into that. So, yeah,
I
that's a
have
good point.
experience with someone I know it. He working very hard to fix his car, put the good rings, good things, music, everything in his car. And I tell him, are you working for the car only? You have a child, need a food, need a shoes, need a everything, but you don't remember that because you working for your car only, for your things only.
Yeah.
And one day I tell him, something happened to you and you miss everything, but something you need as saving and your children. But when you became older, because it's supposed the children take care of the parent when they be older, not put them in a nurse's home and forget them there, because I growing up in a country, we care our people with elders. My grandma passed away, and with another grandchild take care of her, another child take care of her. But after I tell him, after 2 months, he have a car accident. The lie is for him, but someone throw in the red and his car and mess up the car. He's got his kill at the moment, All the money out he put in the car is gone in a second.
Yep. Okay.
Well, it doesn't exactly say it's wrong that people have those things. It says don't covet the things that they have.
It says don't let them be your God.
Yeah, don't let them be, overtake you. And Francis Schaeffer used to say that the crux of of one of these whole things is that you shouldn't covet, because it's when you covet that you do all the other things. But also, I like the way it says here, you shall not recognize the gods of others in my presence.
That's a good way to put it.
Because
Well, that's what I was going to say.
that's what we're doing.
Well, not only that, but that's what he was so upset with the Israelites for. It was the fact that they would worship him along with all these false gods. And a lot of times they gave precedence to the false gods and not to him. That's really what he's saying. There can be no other God above me or even beside me. And he really, that's one of the things that I always feel bad about the, how do I put this, the non-Hebrew festivals, is that God really doesn't like it when you worship other gods beside him. That's beside or besides. Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty clear to me. That's the first one. The second one is, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth below or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their fathers to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing loving to 1,000 generations of those who keep my commands. Now, idol worship is again, one of the biggest problems they had was idol worship. That talks a little bit about what she was saying, and that sometimes that's what we do. Idol worship is things that we value above God, if you will. What do you think about this? I'm a jealous God. In other words, he wants us to worship him, punishing the children for the sin of their fathers to the third and the fourth generation. Does he hold children responsible for their father's sins?
Well, I think some of the things your parents do, then they've reflected into your life. But I think that, he says in Ezekiel that he doesn't, that if your father sinned, that you can still repent and you can still be okay with him.
I think what they're really getting at is it's not that he punishes, it's just that the consequences of sin lasts farther than just one generation. We got a couple of questions over here. If you got to keep your eye on the people whose hands are up. Yeah, he went first, and then Mark. Oh, thumbs up. Okay. Facebook thumbs up. Okay, fine. Brandon.
Well, I usually try to go what it literally says. and
Uh-huh.
That always bothered me because, a child doesn't have a choice necessarily. But after a lot of consideration, I came to the conclusion that he says that because he's wise and he knows if the parents aren't following Torah, then how are the children going to learn?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Another
the
way to do
children
that.
are going to naturally follow.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a while before one of them opens their eyes in most cases.
Yep, that's what it really is. It's if the sins of the parents lead to negative consequences, which are going to be felt by the kids, and then the kids then have to live with those negative consequences, and they have the step for them is that much bigger. Is I think what you were kind of trying to say. Yeah.
I've heard of generational curses, and I still have a question in my mind as to whether, well, I guess, like he explained, you didn't have Torah, you're not going to be doing it, so you're going to be out there
Yeah.
doing whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. But the other side of the coin
Yeah.
is that God knows your situation,
right,
and He
and-
knows how you were brought up.
Yeah, and in 10, he says, showing mercy to the thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. So that's a big pickup after.
Yep. That's the way out.
Yeah.
Brandon, did you have something else?
Real quick. I've dealt with people in recovery, and I had problems when I was younger myself. And there's a lot of research showing that things like alcoholism is passed down through your children through just like your eye color.
Yeah.
So he's just stating the facts.
Yeah.
If you're not living Torah, you're going to pass things to your children, and it's going to keep going until somebody stops it, of course.
Yeah. Well,
And that's the curses.
yep. That's exactly right. And that's what he's talking about.
I don't think he says, "Oh, look what you did. Now I'm cursing your child."
Yeah. He doesn't
I think
have to.
I think he's more telling you the way he created us
Yeah.
and designed us.
Yep.
This is a result.
Yep. I think that's exactly right. I think that's an important thing because it gets over that little, perhaps, problem. Verse 11, this is the third one. It says, "You shall not misuse the name of Yahweh your God, for Yahweh will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name." Now, mine says misuses. What did yours say, Margaret? It was... This is verse 11. Come to naught. Yeah, you're right. That's good. Yours said come to naught or bring to naught.
Do not bring the name of Yahweh Elohim to naught.
Yeah. So in other words, bring it to nothing, right? So some people seem to think it's, well, the thing that was commonly taught to me when I was growing up was take his name in vain. I never did really understand that one either. But the main thing is, to me, it's pretty clear, misuse the name or make it frivolous and not holy. Okay, we got a couple things. Brandon's got one. Oh, John's got one. Sorry, John.
So to me,
To you.
you have to ask yourself, what is your job? If we're a priest of the nations to the nations, and you bring his name, his authority that you operate under to nothing, then that's the great sin. You are not able to authoritatively perform your function as a priest to the nations. Not good.
Not good. Good point. You ruin your credibility.
For me, take the name in vain is when people say someone told a friend sometime, God gave him a revelation to marry to her. He said, oh, the Lord told me. In another word, I don't want to say Yahuwah. That's just the name in vain because if he have a revelation, she need to have a revelation too, and another people, because in the Torah say you need 2 witnesses.
That's fair.
For things.
Yeah.
And this is just the name in vain. Long time ago, I have a dream. Something happened in New York, and I see everything clearly. I'm visiting a church, and I share with everybody my dream. At the moment, a 50 years old girl stand up, and I say, I dreaming the same, I feel so happy because he have a witnesses for my dream. And I can use his name in vain.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
one opinion.
Bobby did.
I was also under the impression that it's also to swear by his name
Mm-hmm.
and then not hold up your vow or whatever else it is that you're swearing by or lying after the fact.
That's certainly the whole thing about vows is a big deal to God. We've learned about that in several different places. And in the New Testament, Yeshua says it's better that you not vow at all than you vow to God and then not follow through. So yeah, that's certainly taking it in vain. Misusing it is misusing it, and that's a good example.
In the Strong's, it's, the word is shav, and it means emptiness and falsehood and vanity, and which is the shin and the aleph. So it means crash, storm, or desolate. So it's basically bringing God's name to desolation.
Okay. Brandon has one.
I just went through this on Facebook, and my friend deleted me. There was
You've been unfriended, huh?
Yeah. I talk a lot about Torah and stuff on my Facebook, and so a lot of my Facebook friends were spread all over,
Yeah.
The globe. So that's a good way I kept in touch when I was traveling. I used to exclusively worship there. I mean, I was always traveling. So one of my friends started using, this has come up a few times actually. One person thanked me for pointing it out. This person deleted me. But every once in a while, somebody started using this expression, yasam. And so I private messaged him and explained to him that his name is for holy purposes, for prayer, for worshiping him, etc. And to use it as an expression is to make it common. And if you make something common, it's not holy.
Yeah.
His name is holy, and blocked.
Yeah.
But
Kicked over a hornet's nest.
yeah, and then a lot of people use the expression,
Yeah.
I haven't heard anybody say, Yeshua, but
Yeah.
a lot of Christians say, Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't think a lot of people understand the commandments even when they read them.
I agree. Margaret?
As a sacred namer, I didn't have many years in the Christian churches, so I didn't have to unlearn things. And when I did learn of Yahweh's name, and I did learn it as Yahweh, it made such sense that, it's a personal name. Whereas the Lord and the translations that have been used are skirting the issue of giving that name glory and honor the way it should be. And so I hate to say it, but I cringe every time I hear the Lord when somebody knows the correct name that should be, especially if you're quoting scripture.
Yeah. I know it was a big light bulb to me when I
Yeah.
realized that every time the Lord appeared in all capital letters, that literally was the translation of Yod He Vav He.
Right.
And it took me a long time to, as a matter of fact, the book of Exodus takes on an entirely different meaning when you realize that, God's name is being used there.
Yeah.
And he's giving his name to be set in comparison to all the false gods of Egypt. and somehow the Lord just doesn't quite work. So I know what you're saying.
Yeah, and so I can see, I think as Torah observers, we have a huge responsibility, and it doesn't matter how you sound it out, because there's differences of opinion as to how to sound it out. You can say Yod He Vav He, you can say Yahuwah, you can say I use Yahweh. Some people use Yahweh. There was initially when I first started studying back 20 years ago, the only Bibles that were around, I have the Traina Bible from back in '83, and that was one of the only Bibles that had Yahweh's name on it.
Yeah.
It makes such a difference when
Yeah.
when you're reading something. Not only that, it's like so generic to use the Lord.
Yeah. Even if you
Yeah.
don't pronounce it, you recognize it as His name.
Yeah.
And it's special because
Right.
it's His name.
And if you, and I disagree with a lot of the Jewish sources that use Adonai, because that's a mistranslation.
Yep.
And so it's like you're lying to me.
I understand.
If you don't want to say it, just say Yod He Vav He, which I think
A lot of them do.
brings respect.
Yeah.
In that we don't really know.
I tell you what,
Yeah.
we'll probably never find anything as emotional and controversial as that subject, right? Wait, just a second. Bobby?
On that same train of thought, then what do you use for capital L, lowercase O-R-D? Okay,
That's like Lord of the Manor.
okay. But not,
Well, Lord of my life, just for example. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Adonai is a Hebrew word, which means the Lord. It means Lord. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, I'm
What?
trying to-
Why don't Brandon, you say, and then I better have you on the microphone. Brandon,
Yes.
put your
I'm
microphone so we
actually
can hear
trying
you.
to look something up real quick.
Okay,
Yes, I was trying to look something up real quick,
real quick. Okay.
but I'm not finding it. So, but there's been a lot of controversy on using Lord, God, any of those. I'm still studying it, but I have found some history where it was pagan,
Okay.
especially God.
Okay.
Yeah.
That could be.
You know, actually, he has many names that he uses
Yep.
for what he does.
Yep.
And a lot of times associated with what he's doing, you know, because, you know,
Oh, yeah, it's got to do with his character.
yeah,
That's the way
Yahweh,
Hebrew is.
Yahweh Rapha, and
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
things like that. You know, there's things that what he does. So I mean, he doesn't just have a singular name.
Well,
Yod He
but-
Vav He does mean I will be who I will be. I am who I am. Ehyeh asher ehyeh.
yeah.
But I'm just saying he's the eternal one. It means he's always present.
Yes. That's good. Why don't you take that back to Mark?
So there's always going to be a debate on whether we should say the name, what name should we use, all those things. It's interesting that we're talking about this tonight because our Torah portion this week is the Numbers 6, the Aaronic blessing.
Aaronic blessing, yeah. Which you use it 3 times, right?
So that's our portion this week. And it says, so that they shall invoke in my NASB, but the Hebrew is put, set, place my name. In an interesting thought to think about, in the New Testament, everywhere it says Jesus Lord, the word Lord is kurios, which is used for everywhere Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is used in the Tanakh. So were they calling him Lord as in master, or were they calling him Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Just something to think about.
Yeah. Well, I think we've done pretty good on that one. This horse is gasping his last breath. Guys.
Oh, did you find something now?
Okay, I found it. It's Strong's 1167. Lord. Baal, owner, Lord. Baal, B-A-A-L.
B-A-A-L, yeah.
Okay. Masculine, owner. But then down below it says by marriage, who practice wrathful.
Okay.
So I think maybe there's nothing wrong with it necessarily, and maybe people aren't reading thoroughly.
But I'm going to.
But I prefer not to use it now.
That's fine. I'm going to stop because
but
we'll never get through the
I'm
Ten
not saying
Commandments
it's wrong,
if we do
though.
this.
I'm not saying it's wrong, though.
All of you are appropriately interested in this, and you are all perfectly capable of doing your own research and coming to your own conclusions, and we can talk about it one-on-one. Let's move on. Moving right along, as I like to say. So that's the third commandment.
All right.
The fourth one starts in verse 12. Mine says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as Yahweh your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Shabbat to Yahweh your God, and on it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your ox or your donkey or any of your animals, nor the alien within your gates, so that your manservant or maidservant may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that Yahweh your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yahweh your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Number one, notice that there's quite a bit of verbiage here. And number two, it's not too difficult to understand.
Regarding Sabbath, or Shabbat, excuse me, Shabbat. I believe that Shabbat is on Saturday, okay? But I get people asking me, how do you know that? And my response is, well, it's been kept up with over time, and we just know.
It's the
But that's
seventh day.
that's not a very good answer for someone that's a non-believer, and I'd be more than happy to give the mic to Mark.
So I used to have this question asked a lot from my family members that were debating with me on the Shabbat. How do you know it wasn't another day of the week? Well, when you do your research, you go back and you see the Gregorian calendar that we're keeping. They were keeping a 7-day week. Well, the Gregorian was adopted from the Julian calendar, which was also keeping a 7-day week.
Yep.
The Julian calendar goes way back before Messiah. So we're talking about hundreds of years before Messiah came, was the Julian calendar adopted from a 7-day week that was adopted from an existing 7-day schedule that everybody was keeping around Mesopotamia area. So the answer, the short version to this long answer is that it's always been a 7-day schedule. All that happened was they put different names to it, and a different group adopted this 7-day idea. So the seventh day has always been the seventh day, whether people recognize it as a day of rest or not. It was the same seventh day that they were keeping, that the Jewish people were keeping on a 7-day cycle.
Yeah. Another way to put that is the Jews, if you will, had been keeping the seventh day as Shabbat from before anybody ever questioned changing it.
And everyone was keeping a 7 day based on that same cycle.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny how people forget the rest of it, that the 6 days you shall labor. You know, because, I mean, it says that we're supposed to work the rest of the days.
That's true.
That's why the Sabbath should mean.
Yeah. Well, it sets it apart. That's the whole idea of holy, right? Set it apart. Set it apart as the day you don't work.
Okay, I know when the Moses give this command about the 7th day, is they need a guide by the star, by the sun, and by the moon. This is the Shabbat is with the movement, the astros is not the same day every time. That's what I learning. And I have a Jewish friend, and I ask him, is I'm right or I celebrate the right Shabbat? He told me, is the people changing with the time because because this, but we need to follow what he say about the movement is go by the seasons. And the season is changed. Some people, now I know they celebrating. Last month be Wednesday, now this month is Thursday.
Yeah, I
And the
understand.
next one is Friday.
Yeah.
But I can go like that.
No, that's to me that I know what you're talking about is some people have tied it to the new moon, and so somehow or another, whenever you start a month, then you start counting again. And what that does for you is it makes the 7th day happen different days of the week each month,
Yeah,
or from
but-
month to month, and it doesn't make any sense because it would get hopelessly complex.
Someone made me a caption question. What Shabbat you celebrate? I say, I celebrate the Shabbat Yeshua do it. And she asked me, what did Yeshua do it? If somebody need something in Shabbat, because he's sick and called you to go help him, I go. This is the Shabbat he did.
Okay.
If somebody need a food or something or need a clothing and you have it in your position to help him then, and I go.
Okay.
That's what he did.
Okay, let's. Margaret was next, I think. Okay. Charlie's preempting you. Go ahead.
Margaret?
As far as the Sabbath, I think there was 40 years where they had the manna. And that blows every argument out of the water.
Good point. Very good point.
Because there is no discussion. Every
Yep.
7th day there was no manna. They
Yep.
were to cease. And
Yep.
then on the Friday before,
That's a good point. That's a good argument against that.
there would be a double portion that they could
Yeah.
pick up and,
Yeah, and it's the 7-day cycle. It's not tied to the moon.
right.
Yeah.
So this is where I was going.
Okay.
So the manna week can't fit into any lunar
Yeah.
7 day thing. There's 29 days in the lunar cycle.
That does not divisible
There's
by
4
7.
sevens is what?
28.
Oops.
Oops.
What do we do with the other 2 days?
Well, that means every month it has to move, which is silly.
I don't see that anywhere in the manna
Nope.
schedule.
Nope.
It doesn't work. It doesn't, as the robot in Lost in Space says, does not compute.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. John.
Back to, I think, Marvin's question. I always like to say your argument is with the Catholics because they agree that the Sabbath is the 7th day. If you listen to it, if they're honest about it,
They changed
if they didn't change it, then they didn't create a new religion.
Yeah.
To create a new religion, they had to change that.
Yes.
So they will admit that.
Yes.
What they do is the Lord's Day or something.
Yeah,
like
they're
that.
they're not saying, well, actually the 7th day is Sunday. They're not saying that. They're saying we changed it
Right.
to Sunday, which is a whole different thing.
And if you're following us, you're not following what the Scripture says.
That's exactly right. That's good. I knew we'd have fun. You guys are a sharp group. Okay, so that's the 4th commandment. Okay, Brandon. We might get through 10, I'm not sure.
They more than just changed it. They actually boasted publicly about it in newspapers and et cetera, in pretty bold statements saying that it proves they have the authority
Yep.
over
Yep.
Yahuwah.
They changed the Sabbath to Sunday by the authority of the church, is what it literally says.
Yeah. I love the Spanish calendar, because in the weeks it says sábado. There's no discussion. What does it say? Sábado. What does the Bible say? Sábado.
Okay.
Sabbath.
Yep. Good point.
So the Sabbath day, is for rest, but it's also for something else, for celebration. So it's a day of celebration as well.
Okay. Pat.
It's not often emphasized, but you're not supposed to make anybody else work, even your animals,
Yep.
on that day either.
And it says that, yeah, but you're right, it's not often emphasized.
Anything, Mark? One more here, then we'll move on. He wants to move on, so.
I'm actually kind of embarrassed to say this, but really I need other opinions. I just started a new job, and I found out I won't be getting paid for almost 3 weeks. I pay my rent weekly, and I just bought another vehicle, etc. It's strange because I prayed about it and said, I'm not going to worry, he'll provide. But then I get this text, and somebody wants me to work for $200 on Saturday.
Yep, that's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Yeah. The two-part commandment, I think, is really. I had kind of a bad attitude toward going to work, and when I was working in. One day I just read that, and it says 6 days you shall work, and it's like, okay. It kind of hit me that you're supposed to be joyful. It's kind of like you're doing work for Yahweh. Mm-hmm. This is what He told you to do: go to work, and for 6 days. And then on the Sabbath day too, there's also, like Lucia was saying, to do good. I mean, there's things that some people will say, no, you can't do that. I'm not going to work. But there's necessary things that have to be done. The baby's diaper needs to be changed. Mm-hmm. The sick have to be taken care of. Things like that.
Yeah.
And if there's something that, and I think Yeshua said, if the animal falls in the ditch, you go after it.
I don't think He ever intends us to be stupid about
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. Bobby's got something.
Just splitting hairs with this not being or not making other people work. Okay. Then I have to ask, okay, is it okay or not if Charlie uses the bus because they're working to come in on Shabbat,
I think bottom line on this.
I mean, they're
stuff,
already doing it, but
Yeah.
if everybody would follow the Shabbat, then they wouldn't be doing
That's right.
it type thing.
It's always up to you and your own conscience and your own relationship with God. I think if you are honest with Him and you explain to Him your desire to honor the Shabbat and to be obedient, He'll help you both by guiding you in your decisions and also by working in circumstances so that He can show Himself as sovereign. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule for every specific circumstance. I think, like I say, I think you have to pray about it. You have to be honest about it. You have to tell Him, I want to honor your Shabbat. Can you help me? Yes. Yeah. So I think you fall into trouble whenever you try to, certainly whenever you try to make every rule, have no exceptions, and certainly when you try to tell everybody else how they ought to have no exceptions. So, Charlie?
Yes, I've been, like I said, I've been over there by their place. I've been really helpful because I've been doing work over there with them, taking out their garbage, and plus doing that other stuff and you doing the yard. And that's what I like about it, because I've been praying for them to both of them get work. I've been praying to Yah about it, and I'm keep doing it because I know Yah is gonna give them a job. I know they are, because that's what I'm praying for.
That's good, Charlie. That's good. I'm trying.
Okay, sorry. I
That's
need to
okay.
say something about this working on Shabbats. It's,
Okay.
you have to, I mean, it's like, Bobby's not in here to hear this, but it's like Esther said, it's just like if you're driving a car, you're going to take the bus to Shabbat to worship Yah and to learn. And I don't, I ask for forgiveness about it,
Mm-hmm.
I still repent about it when I have to do it, but I know I'm going and using the bus for good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to work. I'm
Yeah.
going to Shabbat,
Yeah. Like I say, certainly not gonna get a black or white answer from me on that.
Where are you going next, Jerry, on the next one? Or?
Well, I'll let Brandon and Margaret, and then this horse is dying a slow death as well.
The scripture that the ox falls in the ditch falls in place with me. Everything in me wants to keep Shabbat. I always want to keep Shabbat.
Yep.
I love the Shabbat.
Yep.
But nobody's just going to hand me money and say, here, for the week, actually 2 weeks almost.
Well, if they did, boy,
So-
you'd know who to give the credit to.
Yeah, that's true. and if that happens before the time comes, then of course I would accept it, and I'd have to.
Yeah. I think attitude
I
is...
still would have to go if I told the man I was going.
Yeah, I think...
So it's a bad situation.
Yeah.
But and taking the bus, I've done that too. Before I had a car, I had to take the bus to Shabbat, etc. But what was in my mind the whole time was that we're supposed to be a community that helps each other. Somebody should give a ride. And if you ever need a ride to Shabbat, if I can, I will.
Okay.
I think we're hogging the whole time here, but Numbers 25, verse 25, and on the seventh day you shall have a holy convocation. That's a mikra.
Yep.
Convocation, convoking, reading, a calling together,
Yep.
convoking. I've kind of struggled with that one sometimes, and I feel kind of guilty if I don't attend somewhere. And for many years, I've just kind of kept it to myself, or did scripture readings and things like that, where you're just trying to get in with Yahweh's word, and because you weren't able to meet with somebody. But I think it's important to meet with others too.
So certainly,
Yeah.
It's certainly what he intends.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But
there's
like I say, I don't think God's not sitting there watching and waiting for you to step outside the line and
Right.
whack you.
yeah.
It's
And then-
more questions of your attitude and of your heart than anything else.
And then there's that scripture in the New Testament that says, "Not forsaking the assembling of each others," and it's also one of the feast days. It's
Yeah,
an
yeah,
important.
it's the-
it's a
it's the
feast
one
day.
that's first
It's
listed.
supposed to be joyous.
Thought you were done with it. Well, I know. I said I thought you were done with this.
Sorry, we're going to stay in this verse forever.
No, we're not.
No, just something I forgot. Just something I forgot
hurry up
to
then.
add really quick.
Okay.
Just to Randon and to whoever else. I had this problem at first, as far as working on Shabbat. And once you make that choice and that decision that it's Yahweh's Shabbat, you're going to honor His will and His Shabbats. And even if it's hard and the road gets narrower for a little while, He's going to come in the 11th hour. He's going to come through.
But what you
So-
should say is that's what's happened with you.
It has happened with me many times.
That's fine. Let's go on. Okay, thank you. The fifth commandment is verse 16. Honor your father and your mother, as Yahweh your God has commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you. Now, fifth commandment. This one, let's see. Someone told me one time that the commandments fall nicely into two groups. The first 5 have to do with your relationship with God, and the second 5 have to do with your relationship with your fellow man. And they kind of do. This one's a little strange, however, because this falls into the with your relationship with God thing. But it really is got to do with that, because it says, honor your father, your mother, as Yahweh your God has commanded you, so that you may live long. So it's honoring your father and your mother is, let's see, it's difficult to imagine how you could be honoring God without honoring your father and your mother. I'll just put it that way. It's a good way to model that, right? Yeah. So we probably won't have near as much discussion on that one. Any thoughts, comments? The rest of them are, you have a comment. Now that surprises me. Lisa has something she'd like to say. Just teasing.
Well, I think in the case where your parent isn't exactly, you still honor them because you kind of fear them, even if they're abusive. You're kind of afraid of them. But the thing is that God steps in. He actually steps in, and He takes care of.
When you are doing
things.
that, He does.
When you're doing what
And honoring is just what it says.
It doesn't mean that you have to like everything.
It doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean you have to be
Right.
utterly 120% obedient, but it does mean you have to honor.
Right.
You have to give them the credit, the position that's due them by virtue of their status as your parents and their age.
Well, and technically, they gave you your life.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's what I think about.
yep.
All right.
I always live in fear of the fact that nobody's ever going to say anything.
I have an opinion I want to share on this. I don't know why I'm talking so much today, though, but anyways, I do have an opinion on this. I think it's in context of parents that are under Yahuwah. I was raised and told to do lots of things that I might have got away with when I was a kid, but when I got older, got me in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's what I was told to do. It got to a point where either I was going to keep destroying my life, honoring what I was taught and told, or stop doing it. And when I came to Torah, then I definitely knew I had to stop doing it. So I think it's in context of believers.
I agree. Not only that, but it's,
I mean, if
like
your
I
parents
say,
tell you to go sell drugs or something, I don't think you should honor them.
no, I don't either. But that's why I say it's not being 100% obedient, but it is honoring. So, but we can find all kinds of hard issues on that. Let's move on. That's the 5th commandment. The 6th one is, I like these next few because they're so long, right? The 6th one is, you shall not murder. Notice how it doesn't say, you shall not kill. It says, you shall not murder. The difference being, murder implies malice of forethought. It implies hatred. Who does? King. Well, I don't doubt that. That's why that's often quoted that way, is because King James did that. By the way, an interesting fact about that, I get to do this too. The book of James in the Bible is written by Yeshua's brother, whose name was Jacob, Yaakov. Do you know why it's called James in the Bible? In honor of King James. They renamed the apostle, posthumously, 2,000 years later, not quite that, 1,600 years later, because they wanted to honor King James of England. I just love that story. That's the 6th one. The 7th one, you shall not commit adultery. That's pretty plain, right? The eighth one, you shall not steal. Yes.
I noticed in running through this time that in verse 18 and 21, it mentions the adultery thing, which I think is interesting because that seems to be a extreme weakness with us.
Yes.
So needed
Good
to be
point.
mentioned twice.
Yep, that's a good point. Adultery seems to be an issue without a doubt. Go ahead, Bobby.
That being said, also in 21, it starts in with the coveting, and wouldn't that be again like having other gods?
You bet. You bet. That's a
And
good point.
Don't be committing adultery with other gods.
Yep, that's a very good point. We've often talked about, about that.
I don't mind it, Jerry. Don't bother me. Gives me exercise.
I know, you need it.
Another way to commit adultery is when the people make a command with God when they marry.
When they what?
When they marry, and later they be divorced and take another woman, and they forget the promise to make the God. This is adultery because they left the woman and take another one.
Well, that's certainly the Catholic viewpoint. Yeah.
You know, it's no matter what religion people marry because they do it under God.
Well, there
you
is
know?
no doubt that the commitment they make when they give the oath to one another does not include the possibility of getting out of it. That's true. I want to talk about stealing. Where it says, you shall not steal. What's an implication of you shall not steal? Private property. So the Bible definitely allows the ability to have private property. Uh-oh, somebody stole the microphone.
Yeah, this one comes up with me all the time at work. I make enemies at work because I won't cheat hours. And when I tell them that's stealing, they don't like me for saying that.
That's a good point, but you're certainly on strong ground, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. We're almost done, but it's a shame not to go ahead and finish. That was, let's see, the ninth one is verse 20. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Mm-hmm. Most people call that lying,
Right.
but false testimony against your neighbor is a little bit bigger deal than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not that lying is a good thing. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But specifically, this is intended to harm somebody.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the ninth one, then for you who were counting to 10, Lisa, the 10th one is verse 21. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not set your desire in your neighbor's house,
Right.
or his land, his manservant or maidservant, his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And covet was the thing I had to struggle with in my early childhood because I didn't know what the word meant, right? But once I kind of understood what the word meant, I was able to realize that it's at the bottom of a lot of sin, right? It's,
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, boy, I thought we'd be farther than this. Our time's about up, and we've made it through the Ten Commandments. It's the second time through for us, probably the nth time through for us. Margaret's got something. And then I'm interested in anything you might have you want to talk about.
On the coveting subject, you know, if you look at something and you say, "Oh yeah, I really like that," and you're able to get it, you have the means to get it. That's not really coveting. It's just like,
No, that's a decision you made. Yeah.
It's coveting is when you're not able to get it,
Yes.
and then you go.
Well, and
into devious means, I guess.
And the desire to have it is
Yeah.
pretty much overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because I can identify with that one. Again, when I was a young kid, I had that. You know, there were things I just really, really wanted.
Well,
Yeah.
I know I want one of those recliners that lifts you up
Yeah.
and that moves and that does the massage. It's like, and really I can afford it, but I just haven't done the shopping. But it's just like, it's like, I'm not coveting. I can really,
Yeah.
I need it.
Yeah.
I might even be in the need for it. So
I believe coveting is when you desire what belongs to somebody else, not one like they have, but theirs.
I want yours.
Yeah, theirs. And I think it's tied into jealousy and envy and not wanting them to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
I heard somebody mention one time, he said, "Oh, I like your house. I wish I had your house and you had a better one." And I thought, well, that's a good way of putting it.
Yep.
Two more here coming up.
I'm looking at to bear false witness, and the word false in Strong's is the same as it is with when I read you about using Yahweh's name in vain. So it's the same Strong's number, H7723, and it's shav, and it's also to crash, storm, and bring desolation. So to bear false witness is to bring them to desolation. And the other thing I wanted to mention is also when we talked about I am a jealous Yah. Jealous in the Strong's is zealous. So when you look it up in Hebrew, it's really not the word jealous. So I think that's an incorrect interpretation because jealous signifies sin,
No, I don't think so.
But it says zealous. It says zealous. Because when I looked up the definition of jealous, none of it was good.
Well, most people may think that, but I don't think the word jealous necessarily means sin or anything to do with sin.
So the word jealous is kana, and it means to acquire. Nest or zealous, it's the pictograph of the Kaf, which is the sun at the horizon setting, and the noon, which is the seed. So if you combine them, it means a picture of the seed, gathering the horizon, gathering of the light, gathering the seed. So I feel like it's Yeshua gathering his seed. And so he wants to be zealous and have his like a mother hen kind of thing. It's kind of what I'm picturing. So that's what I'm picking up on jealous. But when I look up the word jealous, it doesn't. In Webster, it's suspicious, apprehend, rivalship, uneasy, fear. That's what it means.
That's fine, but that's what that is. That's the way people use it.
Right. But are you saying that the word jealous is the right word?
No, not necessarily. All I'm saying is that I don't think jealous is always a negative connotation.
Okay.
I mean, I think in past history, it probably didn't mean that at all.
Okay.
Okay. I'll bet not.
I just have this to say. I think that we covet when we're not thankful.
That's a fair point.
Because sometimes I just feel thankful for no good reason.
Well,
I think that we're supposed to feel thankful.
I think so. I think
it says in everything give thanks.
Yeah, and I think thankfulness is part of contentment.
Yes,
and contentment
yes.
comes from being happy with what you have. And if you're happy with what you have, you don't covet.
And you can't do anything about what you don't have.
Well, you could, but
Well, I mean, you
don't wanna do
could.
it.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, you might not be able to. The thing is that we're supposed to be thankful. Like I've been shredding a bunch of papers that I kept forever, and I've just gotten thankful, thinking I'm getting rid of my past stuff,
Okay. We've gone a little over, but
Yes.
we've had a fair discussion. I thought it's been a pretty good discussion. Next week, we'll get to the really fun stuff, if you ask me. So, you guys, thanks for the good discussion. I hope you have a good week. Let me pray. Father God, thank you for your Torah. Thank you for the second telling of your law. Thank you for how much it makes us think. Thank you for the ability that it has to work in our hearts, to help us know how much you love us. It helps us to understand how important it is that we be obedient, that we understand what obedience really looks like. We thank you so much for your forgiveness, because it's a pretty tall order, Father God. But I just ask that you'd help us to think on these things as we go through the week. Keep us soft-hearted and with open ears that we might hear your leading. And keep us safe until we meet next week. In Yeshua's name, amen. Good night, everybody. I forgot to say that.